Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucy and I share videos on the topic of chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID and mind-body approaches that can be helpful with those conditions. So today's video is about why it can be hard to be with emotions and examples of not being with emotions. So I think this is really helpful to reflect on, because one of the things that helped me most in my recovery was realizing that I was avoiding emotions or that I was repressing emotions. So having an idea of what this might look like can be helpful, because if we've lived like this for a very long time, it might feel very normal and it might be things you don't really notice or you haven't reflected on before. And I have shared some ideas around this in previous videos, but I wanted to give a few other examples today. So I'm not a medical professional. This isn't medical or mental health advice. These are just ideas based on my own experience or things that I've read. So on a very basic level, emotions can be uncomfortable. So they can be a signal of something dangerous. So if we feel anxious or if we feel anger, there is a high chance that our fight or flight nervous system response has kicked in and we are concerned about a threat. And this is really helpful for real life threats, like if there was someone burgling your house, or if someone was trying to attack you, or if a car was coming and you hadn't looked left and right and you needed to get out of the way quickly. But we also get these emotions when there's perceived threat. So when there's not actually a real threat, but the threat is to do with an idea or a thought that we're having. And so it might be a potential threat in the future, or it might be a potential threat now, but the thought is what's causing us to feel that uncomfortable feeling. So it could be a worry about, what if I lose my job? In the moment, that thought feels like a very real threat, and so we might get those emotions coming up. So of course, if there's a threat, the reason our body is going to give us strong emotions is to help to try and protect us from that threat. But if we haven't learned how to be with emotions or regulate ourselves when those emotions come up, then that can mean that we avoid emotions, or we let emotions linger in the background and don't really address them. So there's many different ways that we might be doing this, and I think to some extent it's pretty common, and most people don't reflect on a day-to-day basis around how much they are being with their emotions or how much they might be avoiding emotions. But in our day-to-day lives, there are so many distractions that we can use. So I suspect it's pretty common that people avoid emotions because our brains are predisposed to seek pleasure and reward, and having that hit of dopamine is much more likely going to be a nice feeling compared to sitting with an unpleasant emotion. And I think also some people can find being with positive emotions challenging. For instance, you might see someone become so overwhelmed with happiness that they cry, and they mightn't feel sad, they might feel happy, and they might feel relieved or good, but it can be very overwhelming to experience that positive emotion. I've also heard of some people experiencing more symptoms when they have positive emotions, like excitement or that feeling of elation. And I don't know the exact cause for that, and it could be that there's other emotions underneath the surface as well as the positive emotion. But in most cases, I think the emotions that we're avoiding would be negative or unpleasant emotions. And there's quite a lot of different emotions that we might want to avoid, because there's many really uncomfortable emotions. So some examples that are pretty well known would be, for instance, going to alcohol or drug use, overeating, or over-exercising, or sleeping. So for some people, when they go to meditate, they fall asleep. And for some, it's just because they're tired. But for others, it's because it's a sort of a protective mechanism that is potentially helping them avoid emotions that they might otherwise notice during that time. And so with these coping mechanisms like drinking or taking drugs or overeating or emotional eating, it immediately takes our attention away or gives us that sense of pleasure or reward, which can become a distraction to the emotion that we might be feeling. So other examples could be to do with relationships. So if you notice that you don't really like people asking how you feel or having really deep, intimate conversations, it could be related to the fact that you will end up experiencing emotions in front of that person, and therefore it can feel quite vulnerable. It might even be that you do want people to ask you how you feel, but once they do ask, or once they show empathy, it can feel quite uncomfortable to be in that situation. So personally, I really like when people ask me how I'm feeling, but in some situations, if they are really empathetic and giving me lots of space, I can feel quite uncomfortable, and I notice that I want to move the conversation on. And that is me avoiding the emotions that I might feel in that situation. And it's in particular because I'm with someone else, it feels unsafe for me to express that emotion. So that's something I've noticed since doing this work and becoming more aware of emotions that I might be repressing or trying to avoid. Another example could be having relationships with emotionally unavailable people. So if you are in relationships, whether that's friends or partners, with someone who is emotionally unavailable, that means that you don't either have the chance or choose to share emotions with that person or your deep feelings on something. And for some people, that's just their norm and that's what they're used to, and that's why they end up in that type of a relationship. And for some people, it feels very comfortable and good, and for others, it feels less comfortable or feels as though part of them is not being seen. But if they were to be in a relationship with someone who is emotionally available, that potentially could also be quite challenging, because being seen might mean that they have to be with their emotions in that experience. And there's lots of nuances, so I'm sure people are very different when it comes to relationships, and we can bring it back to internal family systems where we have different parts, and different parts will have taken on different roles, and different parts might have different experiences of being with emotions, not being with emotions, protecting us from other parts that maybe carry pain. So if you haven't seen my video on internal family systems, you can check that out, because otherwise this little explanation won't make much sense. Another sign of potentially not being with emotions could be saying that you're fine or believing that you're fine when you're actually in quite a difficult situation. And of course, it's really nice when people can see the positive side of their situation, but if your reaction is quite dramatically different to what your situation is, there is a high chance that there's emotions under the surface you're not aware of. So if you are really struggling and you're bedbound and you have a lot of symptoms every day, and you sort of are you have the outlook that, oh, I'm actually okay, my life is okay, it's not ideal, but I'm doing okay, I'm fine, then this might be your general attitude towards challenge, in which case you may struggle to be with the emotion of frustration or feeling upset and sad and hopeless or helpless. Of course, this isn't the case for everyone. Some people maybe have already worked through their emotions and that's why they feel emotionally stable and okay. But for others, it could be that they are not really being with their emotion. Another example of this could be that their tendency is to always think of people who have a worse off situation to them. So if someone's in a difficult situation, it might not matter what difficult situation they're in, they might always think, well, I'm better off than someone who's got it worse than me. And whilst that can also be a really nice way to look at things, because it shows you have empathy, it shows that you have understanding of other people's struggles, and it's not a victim mindset, it also could mean that you're not really addressing the challenges that you're facing. And maybe there's a discomfort in acknowledging that there's something wrong or that there's a problem. And again, this is something I definitely relate to, and can look back at my past and think of certain instances where other people were trying to express, oh, you know, it's awful the situation you're in, and I'm trying to say, oh, no, I'm okay, like it's not that bad. So again, it's sort of in some way denying our own reality. Of course, it might not feel like that because our reality might feel as though right now we are okay, and that's because that's a coping mechanism that we're very used to using, and it feels safe and it feels much easier than being in a place of struggling with the feelings associated with the challenge that you're facing. Another example somewhat related to this could be that you have had some traumatic, even if they're small traumatic experiences in the past, and when you think back on these experiences, you can't tap into any emotion or any feeling around it. So naturally, it can be very protective and normal for part of us to sort of shut down feelings when they are really strong or overwhelming. But if you've experienced something in the past that, quote unquote, maybe should have generated difficult emotions for you, but you don't have a recollection of difficult emotions, or if you think back to that event, you can't tap into difficult emotions or notice any emotions coming up with that memory, it could show that there's a part of you that is very good at numbing what you're feeling, and therefore protecting you from actually feeling that emotion and that feeling. And in some cases, this can be really helpful for people, because if emotions are extremely overwhelming, then maybe it's not okay for someone to feel that emotion in their current circumstance, and it is better to have this sort of numbing effect. But it's just something to be aware of, because it again can show there's a coping mechanism or an ability within you or within a part of you to shut down emotions and to shut down around a difficult experience, or to numb the feelings around that experience. Other possibilities could be not having strong feelings and rarely getting emotional, so feeling very much like your emotions are always in check. You rarely cry, you rarely have an overspill of emotions. Or it could be the opposite, where actually your emotions become overwhelming, and as in the case that they've been bottled up for a while, when you do get emotional, it's really hard to stop crying, or it's really hard to stop feeling that feeling, and it lasts for a long time, or it's really intense and really strong. So this might, and again, all of these are sort of only possibilities because it's very nuanced. these might indicate that you didn't deal with the emotions at the time. So there's been emotions that are lingering under the surface and all of a sudden they've kind of spilt out. Another way to avoid emotions is being a people pleaser. So people pleasers don't want to let others down. They don't want to say no. And that's often because it brings up difficult emotions in them to feel like they're letting someone else down. So someone might think of it that they don't want others to feel bad, but with others potentially feeling let down, or you perceive that they might feel let down or they might feel angry at you, it's actually what emotion is brought up in you for that situation that you could be avoiding. So if you find it really hard to say no to people or to set boundaries, think about the feelings that might show up for you if you did set that boundary, and notice, is that a difficult feeling to be with? For some people it could be a feeling of guilt, and guilt can be a really strong emotion and a difficult emotion to be with or to sit with. I know for me in the past, when I felt guilty, it felt incredibly uncomfortable, that I would always want to avoid guilt, and therefore I'd always be trying to be very careful about every decision I made, because I was concerned that if I made a quote unquote bad decision, I would feel regret and guilt. And for me, those emotions were really uncomfortable. So that's another kind of little example of avoiding emotions, by trying to get things right all the time or trying to make the right decision, whether that's to do with other people or whether it's just to do with yourself. Potentially making the wrong decision or a decision that doesn't work out well could bring up those difficult emotions, and therefore part of you has made this strategy to be very careful around decisions that you make. Another example could be holding grudges or having an ongoing feeling of anxiety in the background of your life. So for some people, it's so normal for them to feel anxious that they don't even really realize. They might realize they're an anxious person or that they have a lot of anxiety, but they mightn't realize that the reason the anxiety is there so consistently is because they're not really properly being with that feeling. They're not giving that feeling time or sitting with that anxiety. And with holding grudges, it's similar, where potentially you're not allowing yourself to really be with the emotions that are difficult, so they linger and they are just there in the background, or they carry on whilst you may have moved on in terms of what you're thinking about or what you're doing, but you still have that feeling of resentment or anger towards someone because you haven't really fully experienced the difficult feelings around that particular situation or event. Another sign could be finding meditation difficult. So if you find that meditation brings up quite a lot of stress or anxiety or feelings that feel overwhelming, it could show that this is the time that these emotions are coming to the surface because you haven't noticed them before. And this can be really normal. And for some people, meditation is not recommended because if they have quite severe past trauma, then repressing emotions, as I said before, can be a coping mechanism that's helpful in some cases, or doing meditation can be so triggering that it brings up a lot of emotions that feel very difficult to be with, to process and to manage. So it becomes overwhelming. And that's, of course, just for some people. For many people, meditation is really helpful. If emotions come up, they're emotions you can manage and they don't feel too overwhelming. So just to briefly touch on why it's important to reflect on these things. If you notice that you find it difficult to be with emotion, then, and you are repressing emotions, then they could be contributing to your physical symptoms. And the more that you can notice the different strategies that you have to repress emotions or to avoid emotions, then the more you can notice, oh, I'm not being with what I feel at the moment, and therefore I need to give myself some time and some space to do that. And some people manage this very well on their own. Other people need the help of a therapist, or if you have had extreme trauma in the past, understanding how to process that in a healthy way with the help of a mental health professional or a therapist could be really important for you. But for others, it is possible to learn how to do this yourself and how to be with emotion more and how to tap into noticing when you're avoiding emotions. I suppose the benefit of me learning all of this was that I got my health back, and I'm now able to do a lot of things I wasn't able to do before. Feeling emotions, whilst it's uncomfortable at the time, if you're able to learn how to do this and do it on a regular basis, then your life could be dramatically improved in terms of how you feel emotionally and your well-being, your general outlook, and also physically. If you are in the same boat as I was, where emotions and repressed emotions were impacting me physically and generating symptoms. So hopefully this video has been helpful. If you did find it helpful, please like and subscribe. And if you have any ideas on this topic yourself, feel free to comment. I've put a few papers around emotion in the description, so if you're interested in doing some more reading around that, feel free to take a look at those. And if you'd like to join the Facebook group, there's a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.